Hey, welcome to Bandit's Keep. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, humans and demi-humans and all the various races in fantasy games. Basically, I've been doing a series, I guess it's become a series, of videos talking about the different classes in old school gaming, focusing mostly on BX, because that's the game that I play, Basic and Expert. Um, and I've got a decent amount of response that said, yeah, do the demi-humans, because I mentioned in another video I might do that. And as I was sitting down thinking, okay, well, let me look at the demi-humans. There's only 3 of them, right? So which one should I do first? It occurred to me that I was kind of looking at my notes, and I had a note that said, talk about why I like a humanocentric world. And I think this is a good starting point that we can then roll into the demi-humans, because this will give you more of an idea of at least my standpoint on these things and why I like that. This does not mean that it's right and that you're wrong if you like a different thing, but it is the reasoning behind my kind of philosophies on this. So I have little notes here, so I'm looking this way sometimes. That's my notes. So I'll start off by saying that this is the first video you've watched, that I played D&D I started playing in around 1981 or so with the BX, the Moldve basic set, with my best friend Steven. We learned how to play. We taught each other. We played. And we played for many years through high school, basically, and then we stopped playing, and I didn't play for a long time, right? And then I came back to D&D, maybe 5 years ago, with right around when 5e was just picking up steam. Like, it wasn't just out. Like, they were already calling it 5e and not D&D Next, but it wasn't what it is now, that's for sure. And it was awesome. But over time, at first I think for nostalgia, and then eventually because I just like the playstyle better, I've moved back to these like older systems or older style systems. And one thing that you see, like I was just watching a new video from Dungeon Craft. If you guys don't watch Dungeon Craft, you should. It's awesome. He was talking about the future and 5e and that everybody's playing animals and stuff, and it kind of ties into this. So I think part of this comes down to what we're exposed to. Maybe because computer animation is so much better now, and just things are different. Younger people generally, or just people in general, I guess, are more exposed to these tropes of these kind of more monstery kind of heroes, we'll say. Although we had like Thundercats, so I don't know that's absolutely true either. But in any case, I think you're seeing this trend where more and more people do not want to play a human, right? Whereas in at least the people I played with, and kind of my understanding of the intent of the game was that it would be like these old Pulp Fiction books where man was, if not the dominant species, the rising species. Not necessarily the most powerful species, but the one that had the most kind of enduring qualities, the one that would last. A lot of these stories are either taking place like in the far distant future, future, I should say, past rather. They're alternative history kind of things, right? So it's like there were elves and dwarves and halflings, whatever, and then eventually those races went away and humans took over because we are human, and that's one of the qualities of being human, is that we have this ability to adapt and grow and change, where the older races like the elves and the dwarves and stuff, they're stuck in their ways, and they can't change. They don't want to change, and they have no desire to change. They basically just eventually fade away. And the new, it replaces it. And the new is us, right? Is people. So that's kind of a lot of the thematic stuff. Even when somebody, you look at somebody like John Carter, right? When John Carter ends up, on Mars, it's like he is superior to them, and like they're very much doing their thing. But because he's a human, he's able to adapt quickly and learn. I mean, he does have that advantage of the gravity and all that. But these things happen, then he becomes, essentially the hero. This is pretty common in that kind of what I'm calling Pulp Fiction. That really influenced early D&D, so it's really in there. But of course, if you look at the rules and you weren't part of those gaming groups that were into that fiction, that would just automatically want to play a human fighter or whatever. You would just look at the rules and you'd be like, well, why wouldn't I play a demi-human? They are better in pretty much every way. I often say, like, why would you play a fighter in BX if you could play a dwarf if you're going just off abilities? Because a dwarf is just a better fighter that only needs a little bit more experience points. So, yeah, why would we play humans? Why do we play humans? And part of this comes down to, I guess I'm speaking to the DMs, right? You can build your world to be more human-centric. And there are some advantages to it, I think, and the reason why I really like it. I will point out, too, that I've been playing a campaign of Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerer of Hyperborea, and in that game, there are no demi-humans. Like, everybody's a human. There's different races of humanity, and they have some different physical characteristics as far as looks, but they don't have any bonuses or penalties or whatever. They're basically all equal. So you're really just playing it for flavor, which I think is cool to do even with demi-humans. And I had thought about doing that at one point, and I think that's the direction like D&D's going, right? It seems like with Tasha's book, I don't have it, so I don't know. I'm just seeing videos about it. They're allowing you to kind of pick and choose where you put your bonuses and penalties depending on which race you choose, which means that basically you could play anything you want, and you don't have to, it can be whatever you want, which is it's kind of cool, I guess. But what that does do is it flattens everything, right? Everything becomes the same, right? If everything is the same, then why would you be an elf? Like, what's the advantage of that? Unless you are heavily into the lore, and then you're relying on everybody else that you play with to be into that lore as well. So I think in some groups that could work really well. In others, maybe not so much. So then that was kind of went to the side there for a second. But so let me just talk about why I like a human-centric world, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of creating it, I guess. Part of it is a balance thing, you know. If you look at it like, well, like I just said, a dwarf is a better fighter than a fighter, an elf is a better magic user than a magic user. And yes, they do require more XP and those kind of things, but in the scheme of things, especially if you play a lot of one-shots, which I know a lot of people do that play online, and you're not playing long campaigns, things like level caps and things like them needing a little bit more XP doesn't really add up to, you know, it being a problem, right? So, you know, I'm always going to choose an elf over a human for my magic user if I can just make a third level character, because why wouldn't I, right? So I mean, I'm always going to choose a dwarf over a human fighter. I'm talking about if you're trying to build the best character mechanically. You know, even to the extent of if playing BX, you're even often better off playing a halfling than you are a thief, because unless you're doing pickpockets, I mean, I guess they don't get the climbing, but they hide better, which is one of the major things that people do with thieves. Even though if you watch my thief video, I don't think thieves should be sneaking ahead. That's a whole other thing. But halflings are great at hiding. They're great with missile weapons, which is often where you find a thief, and they get better hit points and can wear armor, better armor if they want to. So all of the demi-humans are better than the human equivalents, you know. So there is this certain balance, right? It's like if you don't have the demi-humans, then everybody kind of starts off on more equal footing. You really see the difference between the fighter, the cleric, and the magic user and the thief. They all have very great differences, and you're really choosing one because you want that skill set, right? It's not like, oh, well, that's a better version of this. So that's one reason. That's the least interesting reason to me. I mean, you can balance it just by giving people stuff, which is basically what D&D did. I mean, if you look at how D&D is now, instead of going, oh, well, crap, you know, the elves are too powerful, we got to, you know, nerf them, I think is the term people use. Instead, they just gave more to the other races. And then they kept doing that. And then you have this, like, arms race until everybody has spellcasting, everybody can wear armor, you know, everybody's the same, which is where we're at now. So this comes down to my second point, which is I want my demi-humans and everything that's not human to be interesting and unique. And it was an interesting video. I think it was Matt Colville who was talking about it. I don't remember what the video was about. It wasn't about this, but he kind of mentioned it in it. And he was talking about how in his world elves are weird or whatever. And then some player wanted to play an elf, but they wanted to play this like really abstracted character that wasn't anything like an elf. And he was like, well, elves aren't like that in my world. And then the person was like, yeah, but you know, my character is unique and he's not the average elf. But yeah, you are, because was Colville's point, was that because if you are the main elf in the story that is the campaign, you are what people think of when they see the elf, right? So most people think of when you have the right, like that's who people think of when they think of drow. Like they think of these rangery, blah blah blah. Even though most drow aren't really like that, right? But that's the most famous, right? So they're gonna remember that your character is gonna be the most famous elf. So people are gonna remember the elf to be like your character. So your character should be representative of that weird race if you're going to be weird. And I kind of like that. I liked how he kind of was talking about that, and I think that's super important. And here's the thing. If you make demi-humans more rare, then you can make them more unusual and interesting. And in fact, as a DM, you could introduce things like elves and dwarfs into your game as all NPCs early on. And then if characters either, retire or they die, and somebody wants to play an elf, now they have a sense of how the elf should be in that world, right? And they shouldn't just play him as the pointy-eared human, right? Because they've already seen you play the elves. They already kind of have the idea of how the elves are. And when they say, hey, I want to play an elf, and you say to them, well, yeah, but remember though, elves, dance naked in the moonlight, 3 times a month to get their spells, and they only eat, raw fish, and whatever you made up for elves. This is what you're doing if you're playing an elf. Like if you want to play an elf, this is an elf. Like it's not a human with pointy ears. This is an elf in my world. And if you get players on board with that, you get some really cool, interesting stuff. I don't know, a good example, but an example of how this happened in play with me was that when we were running Dolmenwood, which you can, if you're interested in actual plays, you can find it on the channel. Mike's character, the cleric, Enoch, died. But they had picked up this NPC, Moss Dwarf. Oh my god, I won't be able to think of his name now off the top of my head. But anyways, I had played this Moss Dwarf really weird and, things. So when Mike's character died, I was like, well, hey, play this dwarf for now, instead of just trying to throw a new character in there. And he picked up on all the clues and hints in the way that I ran him, and he ran him really good, So I was like, if you want to keep playing the dwarf, play him. Because I had said you couldn't play demi-humans. That was one thing I had put up front. I'm like, everybody's human in this. Because Dolmenwood has kind of interesting demi-humans, and I wanted to introduce those like that, right? So I didn't want your random, like, Tolkien's type elf wandering around. Like, that wasn't appropriate, right, for that setting. So this is one way that we can kind of create interesting stuff. And when you do read, again, you read this old fiction, when they encounter these strange races, they're strange, right? They're strange, they're interesting, they're weird. And that's how you can control that, by not just letting somebody randomly decide, I'm going to be an elf, but by introducing elves as a race, as a DM, not writing up pages and pages of stuff people have to memorize, but having the party interact with these creatures, right? Because basically they're creatures, until they understand what an elf is like. Then they can play an elf, if it's appropriate, So that's why I like that. I like my weird races and species. I like my stuff. I can make gnomes bizarre and not standard. This is also, well, I'm referring to a lot of things here. You'll have a lot of homework to watch all the things I'm talking about. I was just listening to Monster Man, which is an amazing podcast, James Holloway. So you should definitely, if you like podcasts, definitely listen to that. But he was just talking about the Underdark, and he said something to the effect of, not exactly what, that how he doesn't like when things like the Underdark become like stock, like it's the Underdark, and like everybody who plays everywhere, it's the same thing for them. He likes that the Underdark should be weird and interesting and unique, and I agree. I think that ideally, if you're, and again, I'm not talking about playing in like Adventure League, like if you're playing in Adventure League, obviously you have to go by this, that you want books and to know everybody else. But if you're playing in your home campaign, it's cool if your elves and dwarves and stuff are different. People will appreciate it. And also, just so you get that I'm not saying you have to do all this work, because maybe some people want to make up their own elves. You can also have somebody starting a new campaign, you're doing your session 0, and somebody's like, I want to play an elf. Work with them and be like, okay, so what's an elf to you? Let's think about what the elves are like in this world, and you can help me shape what those elves are like, because you're going to be the elf example. So let your players be part of it. I mean, why not, right? The third thing I have here is that, we're not getting into controversial areas, but I wrote monsters are monsters. And this is the big difference, I think, between D&D then and D&D now, to me. Was a bit of a, I guess is still going on, like controversy about, some of the races being kind of looked down upon. And I think part of that reason is because once you make something a playable race that PCs can be, they become closer to human. Because as much as we want to play our elves as weird as possible, as I'm saying, they're still, if you're playing it, it's still kind of in the back of your head like a human, right? So not allowing PC lizard man or PC, kobolds or whatever, makes it easier to do the classic trope stuff where they're monsters. They're monsters. It's the same thing as fighting a wild lion or, a snake that attacks you, or, giant ants. Like, nobody has a problem saying, oh my God, giant ants are going to eat us, so we're just going to kill them, because people look at them as monsters, right? Whereas when you start allowing people to play kobolds, when you encounter kobolds, all of a sudden it's just like walking into a village of humans, and it's like, well, hold on, why are we just going into these people's houses and murdering them? Like, I wouldn't want my party to go in to caves or a town and start slaughtering humans, right? So why is it okay that they're just going in the kobolds? Well, because in the way that I like to play, kobolds are basically monsters. I mean, they have some intelligence, obviously, but they're basically monsters. They're devious, they're evil, they are going to kill you if you don't. Well, the kobolds might be neutral, but anyways, they're going to kill you if you don't kill them, kind of thing, right? They're like a, or even maybe they're not evil. Maybe they're just an infestation, like rats, right? We might feel bad that like we're killing rats, but if you don't kill rats, right, eventually they might take over everything and spread disease and eat all your food and ruin your crops, right? These things can cause problems. That's basically what the monsters are. And again, by being more human-centric, where most of the playable characters are human, it makes it easier to make the other things the bad guys. And it's easier just to keep it black and white, simple, without getting too far into the politics. Now, if you're into that stuff and you want to have like intelligent kobolds and this and that, then that's cool. I mean, that's 100% fine. But I think that's a different game, you know. And I think that when you start playing those kind of games, that can be a really interesting way to play on some level, right? But if you have a kobold and a tiefling and a dragonborn in your party, and you walk into a town and you go to the bar and there's like an ogre bartender and a gnoll waitress, that's a completely different game. And it could be cool. I'm not saying it's not, but it's definitely a different game. And I like to create a sense of wonder and interest in the monsters, and I think that when they're everywhere, they're less interesting, right? Nobody like runs up to I'm way too young to remember this, but you see it in old movies where people like run up to like TV stores and like watch TV in the store because not everybody had a TV, right? But now TVs are everywhere. Nobody looks at a TV. People leave them on all day in their house, just walking back and forth. And cell phones too. We walk around with them. We use them like there's nothing. We don't even think about it, right? But when it was new and interesting, it was like, oh. And I feel like that's the way I want to keep my monsters. I want my monsters to be interesting. I want them to be special. And when your human character encounters these things, they shouldn't know whether or not they're monstrous or they are people, we'll say, for lack of a better word. So that also creates situations where they need to investigate and explore and interact with things. And then they'll learn. They'll be like, oh man, no, we tried to talk to the goblins last time because they look like they were a village, but actually they're more just like bestial, and they just like, we see that they're just trying to eat us, So now if we see goblins, we know we're going to have to either run or fight them because they're just not something that we can deal with like that. But, it's weird because when we saw the Nixies, they were great. The Nixies invited us for tea, and we were able to hang out and get information from them, and they shared their spells with our magic user, and they helped us, find the path through the water. Once we were able to, help them open up those clamshells and pull the pearls out, whatever, whatever the thing is you're going to do. And then all of these races are mystical and interesting, and it's not like, oh, look, Nixies. Oh, yeah, I play a Nixie too, so let me just walk over because I'm one of those. To me, that's just not interesting personally. So that's why I tend to move towards more of a humanocentric way of playing, and that's kind of where I go in most of my stuff. In fact, I mean, maybe I'll talk about this eventually once I get closer to doing it, but I'm planning on running an OD&D campaign. I don't know if anybody that watches this also watches listens. You probably don't watch it, but I have a podcast on, well, I guess it's on everywhere, but it's on Anchor. And I'm kind of using some information I got from this gentleman, Jason Vey, to kind of use chainmail, which is the original combat system, whatever, pre-D&D, to play OD&D, and I'm kind of like riffing on what he did, and I decided I was going to try to run a campaign in it. So I'm having fun kind of putting that together, and I've already decided that I'm going to have elves and dwarves, which goes against everything I'm saying right now, but I'm going to make them interesting and weird. I'm going to have a bit of lore and stuff because I want to see how that will play out to players who are so used to playing, oh, I'm a dwarf, so I have a Scottish accent and I drink and I have a beard. Not in my world, so we'll see where that goes. But yeah, guys, what do you think? I mean, do you like having just every race available to you in this kind of like mixed bag of all kinds of weirdness? Is that something that you guys like? Do you like playing more human centric? Have you ever tried that? Have you ever tried a game where you didn't allow people to be demi-humans? Have you played all demi-humans? Because that's another way to do it, right? I say human-centric, but you could also say, hey, you know what? We're going to only play dwarfs, and dwarfs are the main race in this world, and I'm going to throw everything on its ear, and all those normal character classes, the cleric, the thief, the magic user, the fighter, they're just dwarfs. They're different types of dwarfs, and everybody's a dwarf, and though you can play all those classes, and the human class could be a class, right? What would that be like? That would be interesting, right? What would a human class be if we made a racist class and the class was human? So that's your homework, kids. So I'll sit down and work on talking about the demi-humans themselves in upcoming video. I think the next thing I'm going to do, if I can get together, I'm meeting up with my player Nikki. We're going to do like a conversation about, because we both like kind of create adventures based on stories we read. So we're going to kind of talk about that because I think that's interesting. So we should see that coming up soon. If you have not already, go ahead and subscribe. I appreciate it. And I guess ring the bell and you'll get notifications when new videos come up. I'm trying to do a video a week. Also, if you're interested in actual plays, I do them generally on Monday evening, 7 o'clock Eastern, Saturday evening, same time. And we have a Wednesday game of Dungeon Crawl Classics in the middle of the day, East Coast, but anyways, 3 o'clock. So if you're interested in actual plays, watch those. They're really fun. I think most people that are watching these videos are not watching the actual plays. I think it's a different kind of audience, but hey, who knows? If you're interested, go ahead and do that. And I'll see you next time.